Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in for today's episode. Hey, today we are hearing from Chad Wathen. Chad is an amazing guy. He leads a group with our ministry. He is super involved in what we're doing here at Flatirons Young Adults and here on the FYI podcast. He's got a great story that I think so many of you can relate with, and we're so excited to share it with you. Let's go ahead and get to it. Chad Wathen.
What's up?
What's going on, my man? Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Of course. It's my pleasure.
Pumped to have you. Hey, before we get into anything else, why don't you just give everybody kind of some background on who you are, where you're from, what do you do for work, where'd you go to school, any fun stuff you'd like to add into there?
Sure. So grew up in Colorado, Arvada, more specifically. I graduated from there and then went to the University of Wyoming for a little bit.
Oh, boys.
And then
hold on. Is it Go Pokes?
Let's go Pokes, dude.
What's the poke?
Poke is it's like an old cow poke, like like the old pokes.
Did you ever poke a cow?
No, never poked a cow.
Okay.
I don't even think they didn't even have any cows to poke. So
sounds just.
I know.
It's false advertising.
Get it together a little bit.
Unbelievable. It's false advertising. So went to
yeah.
Wyoming.
Yep.
Okay, from Colorado. What did you study at Wyoming?
I studied petroleum engineering.
Okay,
So.
and are you currently in? That's what you do for work.
I am, yes. Yep. I'm
Nice.
a petroleum engineer. I currently work from home for a drilling company in
Nice.
the oil and gas industry. So
It's awesome,
been
man.
good, man.
Do you enjoy working from home?
I do. Yeah. It has its challenges for sure. I think trying to get used to that, just not seeing people every single day was tough. But it's kind of nice because I can just roll out of bed and go straight into
Do
work.
your thing, dude.
Yeah,
Working
great.
Boxers, man.
That's right. Yeah.
Wish I could do that, but work for a
Yeah, it
church
might
and
be-
you can't do it.
Might be
so.
problematic if you do that. So.
And I wasn't even prepare you for this question, but I mean, you are. How do you feel about being named Chad? I feel like a lot of people have stereotypes for people named Chad. And you're not a typical Chad.
I definitely it's a challenge that I need to get over. You know, it's a challenge that that the world puts on me just because of my name. Yeah, it definitely has a negative connotation with it. It's pretty funny when my fiance tells new people like my name. You could always see like a little bit of an eye roll or like,
his name's Chad.
His name's Chad. His name's Chad.
It's funny.
And then usually the follow up question is like, "Well, are you a Chad?" I'm like, no,
No,
Chad.
I am the Chad.
I am the
I'm not a Chad. I'm the Chad. Yeah, there
exactly.
you go. Awesome, man. Well, I'd be remiss to say this too, starting off that Chad is one of my dearest friends. We've been friends since fourth grade.
That's right.
Our moms we used to trade off every Tuesday and Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Our moms would pick us up from school. I'd go to your house. You'd go to my house.
Yep.
We'd play video games. And
Night
Chad and I
fire.
have been friends for a long time. And I want to be safe with time here, but I feel like I'd be remiss if we didn't mention the story of how when you or I were in fourth grade, how we almost got arrested.
Oh, geez.
So I'll let you lead off, Chad. Why don't you go ahead and as briefly as you can share the story of how you and I almost got locked up.
Yeah. So I was over at your house. And you decided to show me a video that your brother apparently showed you of just like, hey, like you can make what's called a works bomb, which you, I don't know if I should say this on here, but you put a bunch of tinfoil with some toilet bowl cleaner.
We're just reporting stories. That's all we're doing here.
Yeah.
We do not condone anything that is about to be talked about.
Exactly.
It's just what it is.
Don't do it. It can be pretty dangerous. But yeah, so you tinfoil balls inside of a 2-liter bottle with toilet bowl cleaner, shake it up a little bit and throw it. And it blows up. And
it booms, dude.
We watched the video on YouTube back when YouTube was like at its beginnings. So,
back in the shoes days.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to try it. So it was just something that we had to try, And so we ended up going out to the park behind your house and
remember that, dude.
And set one off, and it was loud.
Yes, it was
very loud.
It's a pop.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
A lot louder than I thought it would ever be.
Mm-hmm.
And
hold on, let me back up here because the reason why I went to the park initially was, sorry, Dad, if you ever hear this. My dad got upset that we were making them in my backyard and didn't want to damage his lawn. So he goes, go to the public park behind your house.
Yeah.
And we're in fourth grade. So we're like, yeah, it's a great idea. Why not? So anyways.
Yeah. So we go to the park, set one off. It was really loud. There's people at the park. I think a rightfully concerned mom probably called the police. And so we started walking and saw the police.
Well, we ditched the stuff first.
We ditched the stuff.
We saw the cop car.
We saw
and you and I in our fourth grade brain said, we gotta lose this stuff.
Yeah.
So we found a tree, just threw it all behind the tree and started walking away.
It was like this 3-foot pine tree that had just been planted. So it wasn't even a big tree.
Oh, man.
So we started walking. Cop approaches us and he's like, hey, yeah, we got a report that 2 kids are setting off bombs in the park.
That's crazy, dude.
And so we sit there and talk to him for a little bit. And he was pretty cool, you know. He was
nicest guy in the world at first.
Yeah, he was just like, you know, like I was a kid once too.
Yep.
Like you know, I feel like every kid goes through, at least boys go through a stage that you're just obsessed with blowing stuff up.
I would argue that we are still in that stage. It becomes less socially acceptable the older you get.
I'd agree with that.
You ever seen dads on 4th of July?
Yeah, it's just
the most excited ones in the bunch, dude.
Buy all the fireworks.
Oh yeah, they love it. They claim it's for their kids, but it's for them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So, yeah, cop sat us down, was talking to us. I don't think he really knew what to do with us. He was just being kind of cool.
He was asking some questions. He was like, "Hey, how'd you guys figure it out?" And we lied.
Yeah, we panicked.
And we panicked and lied. And we're like, "Yeah, our science teacher showed us this." He's like, "Really? What school do you go to? What's the name of your science teacher?" And so we're telling him this. In the back of his mind, he's like getting ready to go, I don't know, probably arrest the science teacher.
I don't know. Or at least go talk to him or something. Say like, hey, you can't be teaching kids to make these
blow stuff up.
So we did that. And then you, Christian, you had just the Holy Spirit convicted to just be like, that's not the case. We learned it on YouTube.
Tell the truth, people. Come on.
So we came clean, and then his whole demeanor changed. He was no longer the cool cop. He was just like,
he went from good cop to very bad cop.
100%.
Oh yeah.
100%. So yeah, we were sitting there, and we were essentially detained at that point. And like your mom came out and
he walked us back from the park, sat us down on the curb outside the house on the fence side of my parents' house, made us sit on our hands, and neighbors are driving by. Yeah. It's me and you, so 4th graders. They're looking like, what is going on? And we're just sitting there terrified, dude. Like I probably peed my pants.
Oh, dude,
I was so scared.
I was waiting for the phone call from my mom, being like, "What are you doing?
What have you done?"
Yeah. So and then he actually called in for backup because I think he was trying to look for something to charge us with. But
he was flipping through his citation book.
Yeah. He couldn't really figure it out, and it was another cop that showed up, and she was a lot more cool and just let us go back home and said, "Hey, don't ever do this again."
Don't do it again. Yep. And we got let off free. So if anyone was wondering, Chad's got a pass. We got a pass. We were bad kids.
Yeah.
We were tough back then.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, dude, great memories. Well,
it was fun, but
such a blast. Don't ever do it. We're not condoning it. So much fun. All right. So from almost being in jail, right? For blowing some stuff up as a 4th grader.
Starting from pretty low. Yeah.
I kind of want to just take your story and start getting into it a little bit more because. I've known you for a while, man. I've had a front row seat to just watch God do some incredible things in your life over the course of the past 4 or 5 years or so. But I kind of want to rewind before we get to now. I want to talk about high school.
Okay.
Let's pick up in high school. What's Chad doing? Where's Chad at? Where's Chad at with God? And let's just kind of pick up your story there, and then we'll move forward.
So kind of just. I started playing hockey at a pretty young age, so that was my sport. And then when I got into high school, it really became my sport. So I think like a lot of my identity was centered around being a hockey player and being an athlete and just like playing for the school. I actually open enrolled to the high school that I went to because they had a hockey team. That was really the only reason. So again, just super, my identity was just super intertwined with being a hockey player. I think my freshman year, I started dating a girl pretty much from day one. It was pretty quick to when school started. And we dated for a year and then broke up for a summer. And then I started dating another girl. So I think another piece of my identity in high school was definitely centered around being in a relationship, even when a lot of my friends were single, doing single things, whatever that means. And
single guy stuff.
Yeah, single guy stuff. And I was always, always wanted to be in a relationship. Kind of fast forward a little bit to my senior year of high school. I got hurt playing hockey, and it was...
What happened?
I messed up my shoulder. I dislocated it. And so kind of went through that whole process, and that was tough because I had to be off the ice for probably the longest I've been off the ice since I started playing hockey.
Wow.
And that actually ended up to be a career-ending injury. So,
and you were how old at the time?
I was probably 17.
Okay.
Yeah, I was probably 17. And I didn't really have many plans of playing in college or anything that up until that point. But it just kind of sucked that it was a forced thing.
Yeah.
And so keep in mind that a lot of my identity was centered around being a high school hockey player.
100%. Yep.
So
anybody who plays athletic sports is nodding their head right now. Yep.
Yeah. And so when that happened, that piece of my identity was just kind of ripped from me. And in order to fill that void, I turned to the other piece of the identity that I had, which
was the girl.
Hmm. And so invested a lot of time and energy into that. Kind of had some falling out with friends. Maybe not 100% because of it, but it definitely added to it.
What do you mean by falling out of friends? Like they didn't want to hang out with you anymore?
Right. They were just they started to do stuff, and like, no shame on them. I was never available to do stuff. So they just kind of stopped asking type thing. And so
you were kind of so immersed in this relationship that they
Right.
kind of were just like, hey man, our friendships it's dying off.
Exactly. Yep. And so they just, didn't want to put the effort of reaching out when the answer was probably no, and like, I don't blame them. And so, and throughout this whole period, just like my spiritual life, it was pretty non-existent. I definitely would have still considered myself a Christian at that point, but wasn't really going to church, wasn't really, reading the word, wasn't really, taking time to be very intentional with it. And I think that was my first problem, right? Especially when it comes to identity. And so, so I ended up kind of like essentially latching my identity onto that, and onto the relationship that I was in at the time. And so graduated from high school, went to college up in Wyoming, and my girlfriend at the time, she was a year younger, and she was going to follow me up there. And so I spent my whole freshman year in a long distance relationship, again, because I was kind of clinging on to that. And then you kind of introduce, like, as far as the identity piece, you kind of introduce like the school, because like at college, you take pride in your major, you take pride in what you're studying, just because it's not what everybody else is, like what high school is. Right. Yeah. So I started to kind of get the identity as an engineer, as a petroleum engineer, that kind of thing. Again, not really turning to God with it, and not really turning to what scripture says about like who I am on the inside. And so
sounds like you were kind of in a place where the different seasons of life, it was like one thing after another that you kind of latched your identity onto. Yeah, like, exactly. Hey, this is gone, so therefore I need to find something else to identify with and affirm myself.
It was honestly, also very centered around other people. I grew up an only child, so that was I think that was big for me too, and just like having the identity of like being part of a team, like hockey, like a team sport.
So wanting to be connected to others.
And then like being attached to somebody, like having my identity in something that they know me like a relationship would, like they know me better than most people. Right? Yeah. So, so that kind of fast forward to my sophomore year of college. Girlfriend at the time moved up there, and it took about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a month and a half, and she broke up with me. And so
you guys were together how long at that point, would you say?
It was about, I think it was like 3.5, 4 years.
Wow. So it's a long relationship. Yeah.
It was, especially for being that young, like it was a pretty long relationship. So, so that was tough. That was definitely the biggest, I guess, like stab into my identity. I think hockey, not being able to play hockey anymore was definitely one of them, but that was the biggest at that time. So, it took me, it was tough. Like I was not in a very good place. Ended up again, just kind of taking my identity and latching it onto school. And so, kind of the perfectionist piece of getting good grades kind of came into place, where if I didn't get the grade that I wanted, like it wasn't just a bad grade. It was a cut to my identity.
It was a shot against who you were.
Exactly. And so, so it was like my sophomore year. I spent probably about a semester and a half, probably just not in a really good place. Kind of battled with non-diagnosed, but it was a little bit of depression probably. So that was tough. And like I had some decent friends up there, and like I still have some really good friendships to this day with some of those guys, but they honestly just didn't know what to do, and like they didn't know how to help you. Right? Yeah. And so I kind of felt like I was, going at it alone, trying to figure out.
Do you feel like you were, and sorry to cut you off, but in that season with those friends, do you feel like you were expressing what you were going through with them?
Probably not, honestly. And like, I think they could tell, but they, like, I never seeked help, and like, I think that was tough too. Yeah. And in that season, just kind of like learning a lot about like community, and like being real intentional with community. Like I wasn't super intentional with those guys about like where I was at, what I was feeling like. And so that, it doesn't help anybody. Right?
Yeah.
So, and then kind of the next thing that came about was I went home. I think it was Christmas. I think I went home for Christmas, and a buddy from high school that, again, like kind of stayed in touch with him, but not really. Like he was having a party at his house, and
little shindig.
Yeah, and so I went over there and actually ran into another guy that you and I went to middle school with, Riley.
That's right. Yep, that's right.
So I ran into him, and I was just like, "What's up, man? Like, long time no see." And I don't know, it just like popped in my head. I was like, and I kind of knew that you two were buddies at some point, and I was just like, "Hey, man, like, do you still talk to Christian? Like, do you still, hang out with him?" He's like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "He was gonna come tonight, but I don't think he's going to." And I'm like, "Call him up, like, call him up."
Dude, I remember this now.
Yeah, and so
I remember this night.
So you
at the barn. I remember.
Barn. Yeah. So you showed up, and we just kind of reconnected, and you're like, "How you doing, man?" And I'm just like, "I'm good." And I don't know, like, I think there's just like something in you that was just like, "No, like, how you really doing?" And I just kind of broke down. I was just like, not good.
Yeah,
like I'm not doing okay. I, kind of shared my story with you, up until that point, and just that, like, I was just like, I was missing something, and like I didn't really know what to turn to, but and we actually, like, in the middle of a party, just like prayed.
I remember that, dude. People all walking around with beers in their hands and stuff, and we all got our arms around each other and we're praying. And probably like, dude, what kind of drinking game is this?
Right? Yeah, exactly.
These guys have had. Oh, I remember that, man, and I remember that night too, because I think so much of why you and I connected so well is that was like, and I see this so often with so many young men and men in general. We don't want to admit it half the time. Is, man, like, heartbreak in relationships have a way of just not only destroying you from like an identity standpoint, but really just knocking down so many walls in your heart. And I had gone through a season where I went through pretty much the exact same thing you did. And so when we connected, my eyes just kind of lit up, where I was like, dude, I know exactly where you're at. So
so there was that, and I think like maybe the next night, or like 2 nights from then, we got together with a couple of other buddies that we hung out with in middle school, and now that's our squad.
It's a squad, dude. The fellas, the boys,
But yeah, I guess like through that too, like something that, kind of looking back in what I learned through that season was like, I think I told you guys this, like the first night that I kind of reconnected with everybody was, I was building my own tower, and like the foundation was not good. So God just had to come and knock it down so that I could start building the foundation again.
Wow.
And so like that's kind of like looking back, like, and I can say this now, but like at the time I didn't have the language to put to that, but like I was just feeling like crap. But but now, like, looking back, like, I was building my foundation just on something that wasn't him, and that just wasn't
something that wasn't solid ground.
Right. It wasn't solid ground. And like, like I could go on building each room and doing all the different stuff with the building, but when a storm comes, like, it's just going to fall to the ground
100%.
anyways. And so like, I think God in his loving manner was just like, I'm just going to take away everything that you had attached your identity with. And so there's literally nothing else but me.
Wow.
And so, and like, that was through God's grace, and then, some help, and God moving through people like you, and God moving through Flatirons. Like, I started going to Flatirons at that period of time in my season. And then another thing that was really big was reading the book Wild at Heart by John Eldridge.
Mr. Eldridge, yep.
Yeah. And so, like,
if you're a man, haven't read it, highly recommend. Great read.
100%.
Great
like
read.
It gives you a lot of language to like kind of deal with like some of the stuff in your past and how that's shaped you into the person that you are today. And like, I'd honestly recommend it for anybody. If you're in a relationship, like, and you want to know a little bit more about your boyfriend or fiance or husband, like, read it, like, it does give
you a good look into the heart of a guy, for sure. Heart of a man.
Yeah. So, and then just through that period of time, just just kind of growing and learning. And I think, like, in that time too, which is kind of another point that was really cool to make, that's really cool to make, is like, I stopped believing in coincidences. And so, like, something that, like, I would either read in that book, or I'd read in the Bible, or I'd hear at church.
Too good to be true.
Well, and I'd hear us talk about it, like, when we were around the campfire or something that. Or like, I would hear something on a weekend service and then like go home and be reading like this Wild at Heart book and like see the exact same point being made, you know, and at that point, like, I'm like, there's no way that this
too
is
many
just,
coincidences
right.
to be a coincidence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no way that this is just a coincidence.
Sure.
And like, and even to this day, like that still happens. And like, I really do feel like that's like one way that I can feel God like speaking to me is like through other people. And then also like through this
constant affirmation of what he's teaching you. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's really cool, man.
And so like, yeah. And then, yeah, just like in that period of time, just started forming, you know, my life and starting putting my identity as a follower of Jesus and like understanding that my identity doesn't come from anything of this world, that my identity comes from literally just being a son of God. And that's it.
And nothing can take that from you.
And nothing can take that from me.
I mean, you mentioned it and you quoted it, but I mean, Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount, he basically says, hey, if you listen to me, you put my words in practice, you're going to build your house on a rock. Storms are going to come. We talk about it all the time here at Flatirons. Jesus has not promised you a storm-free life. He promises you a storm-proof life. Like storms will come. And when the storms come, you're going to find out where your foundation truly is. And like you said, God lovingly allowed a storm to come, blow your house down and make you realize you were on sand.
Right.
And then he said, hey, come follow me. Come walk with me.
Yeah.
Come get to know me. I'm going to teach you how to build your house on rock.
Right.
And as you described that, man, I really love that. I've forgotten some of those moments. I think it's your testimony to the fact that, hey, man, God's redemption is real. That Romans 8:28, when it says he makes all things work together for the good of those who love him, for those who are called according to his purpose, that you're a walking testimony of that in so many big ways and little ways. And obviously you've experienced so much of God, like you said, knocking that house of cards down, rebuilding you back up. I'm really curious now, like since that moment where you kind of had that aha season of like, I need to follow Jesus.
Right.
He's working in me. He's changing me. From that point until now, what do you say you learned? Like, what did you experience? What did you go through?
Yeah.
What did you learn in that season of, I mean, you were single for a while, like just learning to be Chad, learning to be a son of God. What did you learn and experience in those seasons?
I think like kind of first things first too, like that I want to make sure to highlight too is like storms since then have come and I've been able to weather them, you know, and like my identity has not fluctuated because my identity is in God.
Yeah.
You know? So I guess like some things that I've learned is like, I guess number one, like community is just like super important. And just like, you know, for the guys out there, just like having a solid group of dudes around you, whether that's through a small group or just some friends, dude. You know,
I guess F you out of that. It's life-changing, man. It is. It saved me. You're talking about how God worked through it. It's it's huge.
And just having that space to be able to just process some stuff and process it with somebody that you can trust to point you in the direction of Jesus, because like that's what we're called to do is like we're never called to like point other people towards us or like towards anything else. Like we're called to ultimately point everybody towards Jesus, and then like, hey, redemption can come and growth and healing can come through Jesus. Right.
It's powerful, dude.
And so definitely community. I think that's like the biggest thing. And then just like also understanding that like it's not going to be an overnight thing. Like you're not going to go from feeling like crap to feeling like, okay, like I feel whole, I feel solid.
Yeah, you don't pray a prayer and God snaps his fingers and all of a sudden your life's fixed.
It takes work, and it's honestly like it's been the hardest thing I've had to do in my life up to this point.
And it's still happening for you.
It's still happening. Yeah. And like and it's just like every single day, like, you know, God is forming something like in my heart, you know, and like changing the way that I look at anything, you know, like when it comes to friendships, relationships, politics, like all that stuff. Like God is constantly moving, but also just kind of go back to that, like understanding that like it's not something that happens overnight. Like you can't read a Bible verse and just be like, oh, I'm good now. Yeah. You know, or like you can't like go to a couple small group sessions and be like, yep, I'm solid. I feel great. And I feel like I can take on the world now. Like it comes with time. And I think, you know, so kind of just to kind of go back a little bit to my story. Once I kind of started formulating my identity, like in Christ and like as a follower of Christ, it then became the one thing that was still just like really eating at me was that I was always somebody who wants to share life with people. And like, there's no better way to do that than to be, you know, in a relationship and walking through scenarios, you know, with somebody.
You're speaking like from like a romantic relationship.
Right. Like like a romantic relationship, like, you know, having a girlfriend, that kind of stuff. And, that was also a really tough season to be in, you know, a season of just like, okay, like I know what God says about me And like, I also know what Paul says about like the gift of singleness, but like not being
God, this dang thing don't feel like a gift.
right. And not feeling like that's okay, and sitting in that of just like, well, like, okay, like, do I wait for God to show somebody to me or like, and like, that's not the case that, like you got to go out there and search, yeah. So like, I think, and that was honestly me for quite a while too. Like after graduating college and like getting into my job and everything like that was just like just this yearning to want to be like in a relationship, just to kind of go back to high school. Like I maybe spent 2 or 3 months out of a relationship, and so like I didn't know how to do it. Like I didn't know how to be single.
It was a painfully sobering reality.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so like, especially now with this, like this wisdom of like, okay, here's who God says I am. And like, here's who God has created me to be. There's a big part of that that's like, here's how God has created men to interact with women and like to interact with like, to be in like a godly relationship.
So you're almost saying in that time of singleness too, it was like God was pretty much rewiring the way you looked at and approach and viewed dating, relationships,
100%,
women, men, or the whole nine.
Right.
Yeah.
100%. And like, I think that was another like pretty tough thing about just like that whole season was just that rewiring process of just like, okay, like here's what it means to be in a godly relationship. And like, here's what it doesn't mean to be in a godly relationship. Right. And like, I think like a resource that I've kind of come across more recently that I wish I had back then was just, Ben Stewart. He's a pastor out in
B Stew.
Yep. Out in DC for Passion City. And he has this book and kind of a sermon series, Single, Dating, Engaged, Married. And like, I think he puts a lot of really good language around that. And like I said, like I didn't have that at the time, but like I've come across
going
that
back.
since.
You wish you could.
Yeah. Going back, like I wish I would have like read his book or like gone through those sermons, especially like the single one.
You're a librarian today, man. You're recommending all the books for the people. I love it, dude. I love it.
Well, books are good.
Summer reading and whatever's coming up, man, it's covered. Chad's got you.
There's a lot of people that have a lot of good wisdom to share. So,
100%.
But yeah, so like kind of just finding that and just having this like being like not content with where I was. I was content with my identity. I knew who I was. I knew what God says about me and like where the truth is about who I am, but also just like not being content because I still felt this like desire to be in a relationship. And part of that was scary because like I didn't know how to have a godly relationship.
Yeah.
And so like part of that was just like I didn't put myself out there because I was just like, well, I'm just going to screw it up again.
Saying because more fear.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, but then, I mean, I don't know, probably a few months, I don't know, it was probably about 18 months ago, I would say, from this point. Like
this from the time when you were like middle of college, graduated.
Right.
It's been a few years.
Yeah, it's been a few years. So like this is not like a couple months season. Like this is years of seasons.
Yeah.
It's
a long season.
Right. Yeah. So, but yeah, probably just like 18 months ago, I had just gotten a new job, the job that I'm at now. And just kind of, I got my place, to myself again, like I was kind of feeling pretty good about that. But again, just that desire to be able to share it with somebody, and just that desire to be able to like share all these cool experiences with people or with a woman was great, And, so I don't know, like I just put that on God. I prayed about it a lot. I dug into what the word said about singleness and like really understanding what Paul says. And what is it? Is it 1 Corinthians? I don't know. I can't remember, but
it's somewhere in the New Testament. Like I can't quote it right now. Yeah.
But he says, when he talks about like the gift of singleness, like really wrestling with that and just allowing God to really change my heart and my mind around like what it means to be single. I just found my place in just this super content season. Like there was still the desire to want to be in a relationship. That never went away. But I was okay with where I was at. Whereas before, I was not okay with where I was at.
Yeah, you weren't desiring to be celibate. You weren't celibate. Or desiring to be celibate, but it's like you were content.
Right. Yeah.
Like for the first time in your life, you were okay with the way your life was.
Exactly.
You weren't wanting. You were just like, hey, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I'm where I'm at. I'm not worried. I still want things. I have passions and dreams and desires. But like for the first time in my life, like I'm solid, man.
Yeah,
I'm good. And my life is fine no matter what happens.
Yeah. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head where it's just like, you're not worried about anything. Like you still desire things, but you're not worried about it. You know, like I remember back in that season.
It's not driving your life anymore.
Yeah, exactly. In that season, it was a lot of like, man, I'm just like afraid to die alone. You know, I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid.
Sounds like a country music song.
Probably is somewhere.
Yeah, guarantee
but yeah, it was no longer just like a worry. It was more of just like, yeah, like I still want this, but like I'm okay. I'm okay where I'm at, and like.
Powerful.
That's nothing that I did. That feeling of contentment was nothing that I did. I didn't read a specific verse. I didn't read a book. I didn't read something that just completely changed my whole mind. It was 100% God just like speaking to me and giving me those feelings of contentment.
Wow.
And like that's obviously through his word, through other people, but
it took a while.
It did.
Right? God
it
was
did.
graciously and consistently working with you.
Yeah.
But I think you'd say now too, being in that place and cool thing now that you're engaged, right? You came out of that season, you met someone through Flatirons YA.
Yep.
Shout out. You know, just saying, shameless plug, folks. Come to our stuff. You never know what's gonna happen.
Right. Yeah.
But I think what you're realizing too, and what you're encapsulating in your story is like that was a really painful season. All of those were painful, right? Like when God works on you, it is not always easy and fun. A lot of times it's really painful because metaphorically He's performing surgery on your heart, surgery on your soul. But now you look back and you can see God's love in that season of your life where you're like, this was so painful, but I still realize how good God was being to me in this. Like it was almost like this, and I experienced this too, this desire to be with somebody is so important. It's so good. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but it becomes ultimate.
Right.
And God is almost saying, hey, I want that thing to come out of the ultimate seat in your life. I want you to put me in that seat in your life and let this thing find its proper context. And when that finally happens, then I can actually lead you to this person, trust you with that, because now I get to be in the God seat, they get to be in the them seat, and they find their proper context.
And I think like the biggest thing is like now with being engaged, like I feel confident to lead our relationship in a godly manner. That's awesome. You know, I think like, because I did a lot of study on that in that season where I was just like, I don't know how to like, you know, point the girl that I'm in a relationship like towards Christ. I don't know how to lead this. Like,
I don't think anybody does, really, truthfully.
Right. And nobody.
It's a tough call.
True.
Yeah, it is.
And there are things that like it's tough. Like there's things that come up where you're just like, oh man, okay, like
what do I do here?
Yeah, what do I need to do here? But I at least had the confidence that Jesus would show me. You know, would show me how to do that. Right.
You know, almost like through that entire season, the one thing He taught you so consistently was, if you depend on me, look for me. Lean on me, I will show up.
Well, and I'm,
that's huge, man.
I'm a fixer. Like, I like fixing.
We're all fixers.
We're all fixers. Yeah.
Let's just call it out.
I like fixing things. Like if something's broken, especially like when it comes to myself, like it's fixing time, you know? And like, I think just another lesson that God taught me throughout that whole season was just like, hey, like let go of the reins. Let me take control of this and let me do this because only I can.
It's powerful, dude.
Yep.
It's amazing, man.
Yeah.
Well, Chad, thanks for sharing your story, man. Just to honor time's sake, we'll wrap up here pretty quick. But if you had to look back, man, and you could sit in a room full of young adult men, young adult women, and anybody who's listening, and you could say, hey, this is maybe the one or two things I'd want to tell young adults based on what I've learned and what God's done in my life. What would you say?
I would say, I mean, we kind of hit on them a little bit, but like community. That's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge to have just people that you can process that stuff with. And like, my parents are great, but like some of that stuff, like just couldn't process it with them.
Oh, it's weird.
Like
yeah,
it is.
100%.
And, I would definitely recommend like having a group of men if you're a guy, and if you're a girl, like having a group of women that you can approach them that you trust, and like I'll honestly that like a lot of them have maybe been through the same thing or are currently walking through the same thing. So that's probably the biggest one. But then like a very close second is just like, growth takes time, and it's not easy.
Shout out Ben Foot.
It's it does. Growth takes time. It's not something that like you can just wake up one day and be like, I feel better. And like true growth, right? You can do things to feel better.
Yeah.
Right? And like you can do things, you can, go out to parties. You can, not that that's bad, but like you can go out to parties. You can drink. You
find temporary fixes.
Right. You can do things to feel better, but like at a root level of just like I know who I am, and that makes me feel like I can approach any situation because I know that Jesus is standing right next to me, and he's gonna fight for me, and he's gonna enable me to fight for myself.
Yeah.
Like, I think in order to do that, like, it just takes so much time. You know, like, nothing good comes easy. Nothing good comes quick. You know, it takes time to grow. It takes time to cultivate.
It's almost like you're saying is fixes are quick but temporary.
Yeah.
Healing takes a long time, but it actually lasts.
Yep. Exactly.
So good, man. Chad, dude, love you, bro. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
And
it's been great.
We'll see you.
See you, man. Peace.
F yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in to the Flatirons Young Adults podcast. If you have not already done so, please subscribe to this podcast so you can get notifications about when our new episodes are dropping. If you don't follow us on social media, follow us on social media at FlatironsYA. You can stay up to date with all of our live gatherings if you're in the Colorado area, our upcoming socials that we have once a month where we just get together and hang out and form community with one another. And at the end of the day, do not forget to share this with a friend if it has affected or touched your life. We will see you next time on the F Yeah podcast.